The Blackwood slasher. Blood in the forest. Chapter 1. The Jeep. Cherokee bumps along a narrow dirt road through the North Georgia mountains. Inside the vehicle, 4 friends, Rob, Jack, Nancy, and Gwen, are riding high on the energy from the concert they just attended. The music still ringing in their ears, and the thrill of the night keeps the conversation flowing. "That encore was insane," Jack says from the driver's seat, grinning as he mimics playing air guitar with one hand. His foot taps along to the music playing softly in the background, keeping the post-concert vibe alive. "You almost crowd-surfed into the band," Nancy laughs, shaking her head in disbelief. "I thought security was going to throw you out." Gwen, sitting beside Nancy in the back seat, laughs too. "I'm surprised they didn't with the way you kept jumping around like a lunatic." Jack shrugs, flashing his usual carefree grin. "What can I say? It's all about living in the moment." Rob, seated next to Jack in the front passenger seat, glances at him with a half smile. "Maybe just try living in the moment without trying to get us kicked out next time." His tone is serious but teasing, reflecting his usual role as the group's protector. Gwen leans forward from the back seat, nudging Rob's arm. "You were getting into it too, babe. Don't act like you weren't moshing with the best of them." Rob rolls his eyes but smiles. Yeah, it was fun. Just glad we all survived it." The group laughs, reminiscing about the night. They share memories of their favourite songs, moments from the crowd, and how they couldn't wait until the next time. As the conversation continues, the dirt road narrows even more, winding down the mountain. In the vehicle, the mood begins to shift at the dark storm clouds ahead. Rob, ever the cautious one, notices the approaching weather and glances at Jack. "Hey man, maybe slow it down a bit. These mountain roads are dangerous," Rob advises, his self-preservation instincts kicking in. Jack waves him off, still riding the high from the concert. "Relax, Rob. It's not my first time driving through these mountains." Nancy, always the mediator, chimes in with a playful smirk. "Yeah, Rob. Let Jack pretend he's in some kind of rally race. What's the worst that could happen?" Jack once more tries to protest, but he is cut short as a deer suddenly leaps out of the trees and darts across the road. "Whoa!" Jack yells, jerking the wheel to avoid the animal. The Jeep swerves, tyres skidding on the loose dirt before losing control. The vehicle flies off the road, rolling down a steep embankment. The group's earlier carefree banter turn into screams of panic as their world flips upside down. Again and again the metal cage rolls, abusing its passengers inside. After what feels like an eternity, the Jeep finally comes to a halt, resting on its side in the dense brush. They sit in stunned silence for a moment, the shock of the crash settling in. Slowly, they begin to move, checking each other for injuries. "Is everyone okay?" Rob's voice cuts through the stillness. Jack, groaning from the beating he just took as he unbuckles his seatbelt, answers, Yeah, I think so." Nancy coughs and rubs her arm where she's bruised. "Just some scratches, but I'm okay. Gwen?" Gwen nods, still shaken but unharmed. "I'm good, just a little shaken." Slowly they begin to climb out of the Jeep, helping each other as they assess the situation. Jack is the first to step out, groaning as he stretches and surveys the scene. The Jeep is in bad shape. Its tyres are flat, the front windshield cracked, and the side of the vehicle dented from where it rolled. "Damn," Jack mutters, running a hand through his thick hair. "The tyres are blown, and the Jeep's wrecked. We're not driving this thing anywhere." Nancy, climbing out behind him, takes a look and sighs. "How the hell are we getting out of here now? It's completely totaled." Rob crouches down, inspecting the tyres and the damage. "Even if we could somehow get it upright, we're stuck here. No chance of driving this out." The forest around them is quiet, the air heavy with the stillness before a storm. Gwen glances up at the darkening sky, worry creeping into her voice. "We need to figure out what to do fast. The storm's moving in." Jack pulls out his phone, frowning when he sees the screen. "Great. No service," he says with a sigh. Rob checks his phone and shakes his head. Nothing here either. We're completely off the grid. Looking up at the road above them, Rob suggests, maybe we should try hiking back up to the road and wait for a car to pass by. Someone's bound to come along eventually. Jack shakes his head and points at the empty stretch of road. This road's barely used, man. It could take hours, maybe even days before anyone drives by, especially with a storm rolling in. They all glance at the sky where dark clouds are thickening. The air feels heavier, the unmistakable sign that the storm is closing in fast. At that moment, Gwen looks toward the forest. The wind is picking up, making the trees sway. The eerie whisper of the wind through the branches feels like a warning, as if the forest itself is urging her to stay away. A chill runs down her spine. We could be waiting for days for someone to find us, Rob repeats in a whisper, frustration creeping into his voice. He hated feeling helpless, and the idea of being stranded doesn't sit well with him. Nancy chimes in. Maybe we should just stay by the car. Someone might eventually come down the road and it's safer than wandering around in the dark. But Jack, ever the thrill-seeker, isn't willing to wait around. Or we could cut through Blackwood Forest. There's a shortcut. We could be in the town of Blackwood, just on the other side of the mountain, in about 4 to 6 hours. He grins, clearly enjoying the idea of another adventure. It's faster, and we'd be back in town before the storm hits full force. Rob frowns. Do we really want to risk getting lost in there? Gwen bites her lip, looking uneasy. I've heard stories about that forest. Jack shrugs, his grin unwavering. Come on, we'll be fine. It's just a harmless forest. We stick together, and we'll be in town before you know it. Reluctantly, they exchange uneasy glances, considering Jack's idea. With the storm looming, and no guarantee of anyone finding them anytime soon, cutting through the forest starts to seem like their best option, even if something about it feels off. Come on, Jack says, flashing his signature grin at Gwen. It's just stories. We'll be fine. With no better choices, they gather what belongings they can from the car and set off into Blackwood Forest, unaware of the nightmare awaiting them. Chapter 2. Hours later, the group pushes through the undergrowth of Blackwood Forest, the sounds of their footsteps muffled by the steadily increasing rain. The trees around them grow denser, casting long, eerie shadows over their path as the storm overhead continues to build. The once high-spirited group is now subdued, their earlier excitement about the concert giving way to frustration and discomfort. We should have stayed by the car, Nancy mutters, hugging her jacket tighter as the rain soaks through. This is ridiculous. Rob, walking slightly ahead of the group, glances back at her. I was thinking the same thing, but we're committed now. No turning back. Jack, leading the way with unshaken confidence, turns and walks backward for a moment, flashing a grin. Come on, guys, where's your sense of adventure? Nancy glares at him, water dripping from her hair. My sense of adventure doesn't include getting soaked in the middle of a creepy fucking forest. Gwen, ever the peacekeeper, steps in with a calm voice. Let's just keep moving. Once we're out of the forest and back on the road, we can laugh about all of this. But even she can't deny the rising unease in the group. The storm clouds above continue to darken, and the path they're on feels less like a shortcut and more like a trap, leading them deeper into unfamiliar territory. The rain begins to fall harder, pelting their faces and making the ground slick beneath their feet. Thunder rumbles closer now, and every flash of lightning illuminates the forest around them in brief, stark bursts of light. Each time, the twisted shapes of trees and branches seem to loom larger, more menacing. This is bullshit, Nancy groans, trying to keep her footing as she stumbles over a tree root. Hey, it's not much farther, Jack calls back, though the confidence in his voice is starting to waver. The path is becoming harder to see, and even he is beginning to question whether he made the right choice leading them through the forest and even if he hadn't gotten them lost. Rob pulls his hood over his head, but it does little to stop the rain from soaking him. We need to find shelter, Jack. This damn storm is only getting worse. For the first time, Jack stops and surveys the forest around them. He takes in the thickening rain, the increasing wind, and the uneasy silence that has settled over the group. "All right," Jack concedes. "We'll find somewhere to wait it out." Just when it seems like they'll be stuck in the storm for hours, Nancy spots something through the trees. "Hey, look!" She points ahead, her voice tinged with relief. The group peers through the rain and sees it, a cabin barely visible through the thick foliage. It's old, weathered by time and neglect, with darkened windows and a sagging roof. There's no sign of life, and yet it stands as their only hope for shelter. "Are we really going in there?" Gwen asks, eyeing the dilapidated structure with clear apprehension. "Do we have a choice?" Jack responds, walking toward the cabin. Rob follows without hesitation. Better than standing out here in the storm. As they approach, the cabin looks even worse up close. The wood is rotted in places, and the porch creaks ominously under their weight. The windows are caked with grime, and cobwebs cling to the corners like a scene from a cheap slasher film. "Charming," Gwen mutters, though she's grateful for the respite from the storm. Jack pushes open the door and it swings inward with a low groan. The inside is just as unwelcoming, dusty, filled with cobwebs and reeking of mildew. But it's dry and that's enough for them. They step inside, shaking off the rain and grateful to be out of the storm. The cabin is dark, but Jack, ever the prepared outdoorsman, pulls out a small camping lantern from his backpack and switches it on, casting a dim light over the room. "Well, it's not exactly the Ritz, but it'll do," Jack says, setting the lantern on a rickety table. The group finds seats around the small, dusty main room. Nancy wipes down a chair with her sleeve before sitting, her nose wrinkling at the musty smell. "This place is straight out of a horror movie," she remarks, though her tone is more relieved than frightened. Rob pulls out his phone, still no signal. "At least we're out of the rain," he says, glancing toward the boarded-up windows. Gwen sits next to him, running her fingers through her damp hair. "I'm just glad we're not stuck out there anymore. This storm is intense." Jack, always trying to lift the mood, grins and pulls out a small flask from his backpack. "Well, if we're stuck in a creepy cabin, we might as well make the most of it." He offers the flask to the group with a smirk. "To surviving the storm?" Nancy rolls her eyes but takes a swig. "To surviving this stupid idea," she quips before handing it to Gwen. For now they feel relief, safe from the storm screaming outside. Unfortunately, none of them notice the faint movement just beyond the cabin. A shadow lurking, hidden in the depths of the forest, waiting for his moment. There was no place safe, not tonight. Chapter 3. Outside, the storm rages on, with the sound of heavy rain pounding against the roof of the old cabin. Inside, the group takes stock of their surroundings. The cabin, though sheltering them from the storm, has clearly seen better days. The air is thick with dust, and every creak of the floorboards seems to echo in the stillness. "Well, this place definitely gives off serial killer vibes," Nancy says, wrinkling her nose as she runs a hand along a dusty windowsill. Cobwebs cling to the corners of the room and the wooden furniture looks as though it hasn't been touched in years. Jack, still trying to keep the mood light, shrugs. "Hey, it's not like we had a lot of options. Plus, I've been in worse places." He kicks the broken chair to make space near the fireplace. "Really?" Gwen raises an eyebrow, sitting on a rickety stool by the fireplace. "Worse than this?" Jack grins. "You'd be surprised." Rob wanders around the cabin, inspecting the sagging walls and worn furniture. "We'll make do for now. At least we're out of the rain." Jack spots a stack of old firewood near the fireplace. "This should do the trick," he says, picking through the pieces. "We just need something to get it started." He glances around, then grabs the old chair he kicked earlier without hesitation. "This should burn nicely," he says, breaking it apart and tossing the dried, splintered wood into the fireplace, along with some crumpled pages from an old journal he found nearby. Rob watches, arms crossed with a smile. "Man, I'm glad you brought your camping gear." "Yeah, me too," Jack confirms with a wink, lighting the paper with matches from his pack. The fire crackles to life, filling the room with a warm, flickering glow. The group gathers around it, feeling the first bit of warmth since the rain began. "Good call," Gwen says, leaning closer to the fire. She watches the flames dance in the dim light. "At least we won't freeze to death in here." The group slowly relaxes, the warmth of the fire and the sound of the storm outside creating a strange sense of comfort in the otherwise creepy cabin. Jack, always prepared for a good time, pulls out his flask again, offering it to the others. "To surviving the worst road trip ever," Jack jokes, taking a swig and passing it around. Gwen takes a sip and grins. "Yeah, next time we're picking the concerts closer to home." Rob smiles, shaking his head. "No more shortcuts either. We're taking the long way from now on." "Amen," Nancy shouts, grabbing the flask. The group laughs, the tension easing as they pass the flask and return back to stories from the concert. They talk about the mosh pit, the crazy crowd, and how much fun they had despite everything. As the conversation continues, Gwen's attention drifts from the fire to something else in the room. Her eyes land on the dusty mantel above the fireplace, where a small old picture frame sits, almost hidden by the thick layer of grime that covers it. Curiosity gets the better of her, and she stands up, walking over to the mantel. She wipes away the dust from the glass with the sleeve of her jacket, revealing the photo underneath. "Hey guys, check this out," Gwen says, her voice soft. The others turn to look as she holds up the photo. It's a picture of a happy family. A man in a flannel shirt, holding an axe, standing next to a beautiful woman holding a small girl in her arms. They're smiling, frozen in a moment of summer happiness. "They look so happy," Gwen says, almost to herself. "Like a perfect little family." Nancy stands up and walks over, peering over Gwen's shoulder. "I wonder what happened to them." Jack, always ready with a joke, grins. Maybe they moved out when they realised the place was haunted. Or maybe they never left and are ghost haunting these woods, Rob adds with a smirk, trying to join in on the fun. But Gwen's unease lingers. She places the photo back on the mantel, glancing at it one last time before sitting back down by the fire. The group settles into a more comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The fire crackles softly, and the storm continues to beat against the cabin's walls. Gwen stares into the flames, but her mind keeps drifting back to the photo. Something about it bothered her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something bad had happened here. As the night wears on, she stands up again, moving to the window. She looks outside, the rain pelting against the glass and the darkness of the forest seeming to press in on all sides. Then, for a split second, she thinks she sees something, just beyond the trees, barely visible through the rain. A figure, tall, still, watching. Her heart skips a beat and she blinks, trying to focus. But when the next flash of lightning comes, the figure is gone. Gwen steps back from the window, her pulse racing. "Did you guys see that?" Nancy, Rob and Jack look up, confused. "See what?" Jack asks, still lounging by the fire. "There was someone out there," Gwen says, her voice wavering. Jack laughs, but it's forced. "You're just spooked by the cabin. There's no one out there." Rob, more serious, stands up and looks out the window himself. "I don't see anything," he says after a moment, though even he seems uneasy now. Gwen bites her lip, knowing what she saw, or at least what she thought she saw. "I swear, there was someone out there," she insists, but the others wave it off. "It's probably just the storm playing tricks on you," Rob says, holding her from behind, trying to reassure her. "We're all a little on edge. Just relax." Reluctantly, Gwen nods, but she can't stop herself from gazing out into the empty forest. Outside, hidden among the trees, the Blackwood slasher watches silently, biding his time. Chapter 4. The fire crackles softly in the dimly lit cabin, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The rain outside continues to pound against the roof, creating a rhythmic, almost soothing sound as the group settles into a familiar routine. They've made the best of the situation, warming up around the fire and sharing more drinks as the storm rages on. Jack had pulled out a deck of cards from his backpack and was in the middle of dealing a hand. "All right, get ready to lose, suckers," he says with a smug grin, his confidence always shining through, even in the most unexpected of situations. Rob shakes his head but plays along, throwing a few playful jabs Jack's way. Please, you always say that, and then you fold at the last minute. Gwen and Nancy laugh, both enjoying the friendly banter. "Hey, remember that time we got lost after the festival last year and ended up sleeping in the car?" Gwen says, laughing as she recalls one of their more chaotic adventures. "You were so convinced we were going to be eaten by coyotes you didn't sleep all night." "Hey, I saw something moving in the bushes," Nancy defends herself, her face flushing as she picks up another card. "It could have been anything." Jack shakes his head, smirking. "Yeah, anything. Like a squirrel." Nancy responds with a scowl and flips Jack off, earning another round of laughter from the group. For a moment, the storm outside is just background noise. The strange unease from earlier seems to fade away, even from Gwen's mind, as she dismisses it as nothing more than her imagination. But that comfort doesn't last. Suddenly, the cabin is filled with a loud, intense pounding. It echoes through the rooms like a battering ram slamming against the front door. Everyone freezes. The cards fall from Gwen's hands as she stares at the door, her heart racing. What the hell was that? Silence falls over everyone. The pounding erupts once more again the door, more forceful this time, each bang louder than the last, as though something or someone desperately wants to get inside. Nancy jumps to her feet, fear flashing across her face. "Who's there?" Rob stands as well, his eyes narrowing as he looks from the door to the others. "Maybe it's the storm," he says, not believing his own words. Gwen moves closer to Rob, instinctively seeking protection. There's no way that's the wind. The pounding grows louder, more insistent. Whatever is on the other side of that door wants in. Jack tries to look brave and to not look scared. "Relax, guys," he says, standing up and cracking his knuckles with fake bravado. "It's probably just some animal trying to get out of the rain." Nancy grabs his arm. "Jack, don't!" Jack shrugs off Nancy's concern, flashing that same cocky grin. "Come on, what's the worst that could happen? Maybe it's just a stupid bird or something. Let me check." "Jack, don't be stupid!" Nancy hisses, but Jack is already moving toward the door, unfazed by the rising tension in the room. Then the pounding stops suddenly, and the cabin falls into an eerie silence. The group holds its breath, watching as Jack inches closer to the door. Outside, the storm crashes louder, thunder rumbling through the sky, but the cabin feels deathly still. Jack pauses at the door, his trembling hand hovering over the doorknob. He looks back at the others, offering one last smirk, though it's a little forced. "It's probably nothing," he mutters, pulling the door open in one quick motion. For a split second, there's nothing. The doorway opens to reveal only darkness, rain pouring down in sheets just beyond the threshold. Jack leans out slightly, peering into the storm. Seeing nothing, his confidence returns, and his trademark cocky smirk begins to return to his lips. The other three exhale in unison, a long sigh of relief, letting the fear and tension escape their lungs. But then, in a flash of lightning, they all see it. The Blackwood slasher. The hulking figure stands just outside the cabin, partially hidden by the storm. Dressed in his long, tattered black coat, his pale white mask catches the lightning's glow. Hollow black eyes stare out from the mask, emotionless and cold. In his hands he grips a massive axe, the blade glistening wet in the rain. Jack's grin falters. Before he can react, the slasher moves with terrifying speed, swinging the axe in one swift, brutal motion. The blade cuts through Jack like paper, splitting him in two from shoulder to waist in a grotesque arc of blood. The others scream. Jack's body crumples to the floor in a heap, blood pooling around him as the slasher steps into the cabin, his massive figure filling the doorway. He is an imposing figure whose presence was as terrifying as it was overwhelming, casting a menacing shadow that made them feel impossibly small. Nancy is the first to react, her scream breaking the silence as she scrambles back toward the corner of the room, her hands covering her mouth in horror. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" Gwen stumbles back, her eyes wide in shock, unable to process what just happened. Jack was just gone, his life snuffed out in a second. Rob moves toward Gwen, grabbing her arm and pulling her behind him, his instincts kicking in. "We have to get out of here." The Blackwood slasher stands in the doorway, unmoving for a moment, as though savouring their fear. His pale mask scans the room, locking onto each of them in turn. He lifts his axe, the blood still dripping from the blade, and takes one slow, deliberate step forward into the cabin. Chapter 5. The cabin is suddenly caked in terror, the once warm firelight now casting grotesque shadows as the Blackwood slasher steps fully into the room. The group is frozen, paralysed by the brutal sight of Jack's body lying in a pool of blood on the floor. The slasher's presence fills the small space, his breath audible through the rain-soaked mask, and the gleaming axe in his hand promises more death to come. For a moment nobody moves. The fear is so thick it's almost tangible, weighing down on them. Nancy trembles in the corner, her back pressed against the wall as if she could disappear into it. Gwen's heart races in her chest, her mind trying and failing to process what she's seeing. Rob stands in front of Gwen, his body tense, every instinct screaming at him to run, but he doesn't move. The slashers sweep the room cold and emotionless, his gaze settling on each of them one by one. The slasher takes another step forward, the heavy thud of his boots against the wooden floor breaking the silence. The fire crackles softly, the only other sound in the room as they stare at the hulking figure towering over them. Rob's breath quickens. He knows he can't just stand there and do nothing. He can't let Gwen or Nancy die. Gritting his teeth, he pushes Gwen back from him and steps forward, adrenaline kicking in. He's trained in martial arts, he's strong, fast, maybe, just maybe he can stop this. With a shout, Rob launches himself at the slasher, aiming a powerful sidekick at his masked head. His foot connects with solid force, but it's like kicking a brick wall. The slasher doesn't even flinch. Before Rob can pull back, the slasher swings his axe with brutal precision. The blade slices clean through Rob's leg, severing it just below the knee. The moment is so shocking, so unreal, that for a second Rob doesn't even register the pain. Then, he collapses to the floor with a sickening thud, clutching the bloody stump where his leg used to be. Blood pours from the wound, pooling around him as the pain finally hits, and he screams, a gut-wrenching primal sound that echoes through the cabin. Gwen's scream joins his as she watches in horror, unable to move, her legs frozen to the floor as she sees the man she loves, lying helpless in front of her. The slasher stands over Rob, watching him writhe in agony for a moment before lifting the axe once more. With terrifying, deliberate slowness, the bloody axe falls with a final, decisive strike. The blade cleaves through Rob's chest, splitting him open with a sickening crunch of bone and flesh. Gwen lets out a strangled cry, her heart breaking as she sees Rob's lifeless body. The man who had tried to protect her now reduced to a bloody, broken shell. Nancy, still in the corner, is sobbing uncontrollably, her wide eyes glued to Rob's body. No, 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 no. The slasher doesn't hesitate. He turns his cold gaze to Nancy, who scrambles to her feet, desperate to escape the nightmare unfolding before her. Nancy bolts toward the door, her breath ragged and her limbs trembling with fear. But before she can reach the exit, the slasher is on her. He grabs her by her long hair, yanking her back with such force that she screams in pain. "No, please," she sobs, clawing at his hand, but he doesn't listen. The slasher drags her effortlessly across the room, her feet kicking out helplessly, her nails scraping against the wooden floor in a futile attempt to escape. With terrifying strength, the slasher swings her toward the fireplace, slamming her body against the stone hearth. Nancy gasps as the wind is knocked out of her, and for a moment, she's stunned, her body limp in his grasp. Gwen watches, unable to scream or move. At that moment, she is almost in shock. The slasher doesn't stop. He shoves her head first into the roaring fire, the flames instantly licking at her clothes and skin. Nancy screams, a high, piercing wail of agony. As the fire engulfs her, the smell of burning flesh filling the cabin. Nancy thrashes wildly, trying to pull herself out of the flames, but the slasher is relentless. He plants a heavy boot on her back, pressing her deeper into the fire, ensuring she can't escape. Her screams grow more desperate, more frantic, but soon they weaken as the fire consumes her. The light from the flames flickers and dances grotesquely around the room, casting horrific shadows on the walls as Nancy's body is burned alive. The sound of her dying screams fills the air, blending with the crackling of the fire, creating a horrifying symphony of death. Gwen is the only one left, her chest heaving with shallow breaths. Tears stream down her face as she watches the nightmare unfold, her body shaking uncontrollably. She can't move, can't even think. The Blackwood slasher finally turns toward her, his black, soulless eyes locking onto her. He tilts his head slightly, almost as if he's studying her, savouring the fear radiating off her in waves. His grip tightens on the axe. For a moment, Gwen can't breathe. She's next. Chapter 6. The cabin is now a place of death, filled with the horrific echoes of Nancy's dying screams and the sickening smell of burning flesh. Gwen stands frozen in place, her wide, tear-filled eyes locked on the towering figure before her as he turns toward her. Her heart pounds in her chest, each beat louder than the relentless storm outside. She pleads for legs to move. Suddenly the terror gripped Gwen snaps, replaced by pure instinct, the need to survive. Without a moment's hesitation, she bolts for the door, adrenaline surging through her body as she crashes into the storm outside. The rain pours down in thick sheets, soaking her to the bone almost instantly, but she doesn't stop. She can't. Her boots sink into the muddy ground as she stumbles, her limbs weak from the overwhelming fear. The cold, biting wind lashes against her face, but Gwen barely notices. All she can hear is the frantic pounding of her heart and the overwhelming adrenaline running through her. Behind her, she feels the Blackwood slasher is coming. Her mind races, replaying the horrific images of Jack's brutal death, Rob's sacrifice, and Nancy's agonizing screams. Gwen's vision blurs with tears, but she forces herself to keep running, her body moving on autopilot. She's not sure where she's going, just that she has to get away. The forest seems to close in around her, the towering trees and tangled branches looming like dark sentinels in the night. The storm makes it nearly impossible to navigate, and every flash of lightning briefly illuminates the terrifying landscape, a never-ending maze of trees, mud, and rain. Gwen trips over a fallen branch, landing hard on the muddy ground. Her breath comes in ragged gasps as she pushes herself up, her hands shaking from the cold and fear. She's lost, completely and utterly lost. The forest seems to swallow her, the rain mixing with her tears as she runs blindly, her legs aching with each step. Every so often she glances behind her, terrified that the slasher is right there, but the darkness hides everything. Gwen pushes herself harder, her lungs burning, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her will to survive keeps her moving. She stumbles through the trees, crying out in frustration and fear, but there's no one to hear her. The Blackwood slasher moves through the forest like a force of nature, unhurried, relentless. His heavy boots crush the wet earth beneath him, his black coat soaked, but he is unfazed by the storm. His hand gripping tight to his axe, a reminder of the carnage he's already wrought. Gwen can feel him behind her, feel his presence stalking her like a predator. Closer. She could feel him coming closer. Her breathing becomes more ragged as her body screams for rest, but she knows she can't stop. The rain stings her skin, and the cold numbs her fingers, but nothing compares to the bone-chilling fear of knowing the slasher is closing in. She trips again, her knees slamming into the muddy ground. The impact sends shockwaves of pain through her body, but she scrambles to her feet once more, unable to see through the rain. Then she hears her inner voice screaming at her to turn around. She glances behind her, and in the brief flash of lightning she sees him. The pale mask, the towering figure, the killer of these woods. He stands there just looking at her, as if he was enjoying the hunt and torment. A sob escapes her lips as she pushes forward, her legs barely holding her weight. She feels a pain in her knee. Every step is agony, the rain obscuring her vision, but Gwen knows she can't stop, not if she wants to live. Blindly, she pushes through his sharp branches and cold, stinging rain. Suddenly, she stumbles into a small clearing, her body slamming into a tree trunk. She groans in pain, but her mind screams at her to get up, to keep moving. She tries, but her body is too weak. She collapses against the tree, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps, the storm soaking her hair and clothes. And then, in the brief flicker of lightning, she sees him once more. The Blackwood slasher steps into the clearing, his hulking figure silhouetted against the storm. His eyes, cold, black and soulless, lock onto Gwen's trembling form. The axe, washed clean of the blood, hangs loosely in his hand. Gwen's entire body is paralysed with fear, her legs too weak to run, her heart pounding so hard she's sure it'll stop any second. The slasher walks toward her, slowly, deliberately, like a predator savouring the final moment before the kill. He towers over her, ready to finish this game. But then something happens. The slasher pauses. His head tilts slightly, as if he's seeing something that wasn't there before. For the first time, there's a flicker of hesitation. His free hand twitches at his side, as something is tugging at the edges of his memory. Gwen's face, her hair, her eyes, something about her, reminds him of a woman he knew. A past he struggles to remember. The woman, the child, the family he lost flash before him. For a moment, the storm seems to quiet as the slasher stands frozen, memories flashing through his mind of a life long gone, of happiness, of love. The vice grip on the axe loosens ever so slightly. Gwen, barely able to comprehend what's happening, stares at him. Her chest heaves with heavy, terrified breaths, but she sees the hesitation in his movements. She doesn't know why he stopped, but she knows this is her only chance. Summoning the last of her strength, Gwen pushes herself off the ground and bolts into the forest once more. The slasher watches her go, still motionless, his hand briefly twitching as though he might follow, but something holds him back. Gwen stumbles through the forest, her mind racing. She doesn't look back. She can't. She doesn't know how long the slasher's hesitation will last, but she's not going to wait to find out. The storm continues to rage, but ahead of her, through the trees, she sees it, the creek. The creek that surrounds Blackwood Forest. She stumbles toward it, hope flickering inside her as she sees the rushing water just ahead. Beyond the creek, in the distance, she can make out a road. And on that road, headlights and a car. There was car coming down the road. She just had to make it to the road. Tears of relief mix with the rain on her face as she moves toward the creek, thinking this nightmare might finally be over. Chapter 7. Gwen's heart leaps as the sight of the road and the distant glow of headlights pierces through the storm. The thick trees of Blackwood Forest seem to thin out near the creek, and she can almost taste freedom. Her legs ache, her knee hurts like hell, her lungs burn, but the sight of those lights fills her with a desperate hope. She's so close. She can make it. Just as Gwen's foot touches the edge of the creek, she hears it. A metallic snap, sharp and sudden, cutting through the storm. Before she can react, a searing pain shoots through her leg. She screams as she stumbles forward, her momentum stopped dead. She looks down and sees the jagged steel teeth of a bear trap clamped tightly around her ankle, its rusted chains winding back into the darkness of the forest behind her. "No!" Gwen shrieks, her voice breaking with a mixture of pain and panic. She falls to the ground, grabbing at the trap, trying desperately to pry it open, but the metal is cold and unforgiving, biting deeper into her flesh with each frantic movement. Blood mixes with the mud as the rain pours down on her, soaking her to the bone. The headlights from the road still glow in the distance, so close yet so far. The car continues down the road, unaware of the horror playing out just beyond the tree line. "Please, someone!" Gwen screams, her voice raw as she watches the lights slowly disappear, her chance at salvation fading into the storm. She pulls at the trap, her hands slick with blood and rain, but it doesn't budge. Every time she moves, the teeth bite deeper into her leg, sending fresh waves of agony through her body. And then, the chain attached to the trap jerks. The chain snaps in the air tight. Gwen gasps as her body is yanked backward like she were a paper doll, the metal teeth digging into her leg even harder. She frantically claws at the ground, her fingers sinking into the mud as she's dragged inch by inch back toward the forest. The slashing rain and the wind make it impossible to scream loud enough for anyone to hear, and the pain makes it hard to focus on anything but the cold, sharp steel tearing into her flesh. Her heart sinks as she realizes what's happening. This wasn't an accident. It was a trap. The Blackwood slasher had planned this. She had never been running towards safety. She had been running straight into his snare. The chain jerks again, harder this time, and Gwen screams as she's pulled backward even faster, her nails scraping uselessly against the wet earth. The darkness of the forest swallows her inch by inch as the creek, the road, and the chance of escape disappear behind her. Her screams echo through the night, carried away by the storm. Chapter 8. The storm that had ravaged Blackwood Forest all night has passed. The rain has stopped, and the sun slowly rises over the horizon, casting a faint, cold light through the towering trees. The forest, which had been alive with the sounds of thunder, wind, and screams just hours before, is now eerily silent. Birds begin to chirp softly, the morning sun warming the wet leaves, and a gentle breeze moves through the branches. But something about the silence feels unnatural, too quiet, too still, like the forest itself is holding its breath. By the roadside, the group's Jeep Cherokee sits abandoned, its frame caked in debris. The front windshield is cracked and the body is dented from where it tumbled down the embankment. The driver's side door remains open, as if the occupants had only just stepped out, yet there's no sign of life. The forest surrounding the Jeep is still, as though nothing unusual has happened. Birds begin to chirp softly, the morning sun warming the wet leaves, and a gentle breeze moves through the branches. Further in the woods, the old dilapidated cabin stands just as it was the night before, its roof sagging and windows broken, untouched by the storm that had raged outside. Inside, the cabin is silent and dark, with no signs of the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. But there are no bodies, no blood, no evidence that anyone had ever been there. The air is thick with a sense of unease, as though the cabin itself is steeped in the evil that resides in Blackwood Forest. It stands as a silent witness to the nightmare that had claimed the lives of 4 young adults. It's as if they never existed. The only thing that remains unchanged, untouched by time and violence, is the dusty photo on the mantel. The image of the family, the man in the flannel shirt holding an axe, his wife and their small daughter, remains exactly where Gwen had found it, one again coated in a thin layer of dust. The family in the photo smiles, frozen in time on that warm summer day, completely unaware of the darkness that would soon consume them. The man's face, once filled with love and happiness, now mirrors the pale mask worn by the Blackwood slasher, the same man who had once been part of this perfect family. Somewhere, deep in the woods, the Blackwood slasher still roams, waiting for the next unfortunate souls to wander into his domain. His presence is felt in the stillness of the forest, in the quiet dread that lingers in the air. The cycle of death and terror in Blackwood Forest is far from over. The end.